Chris from Less Than Jake, and if you haven't already figured it out, you're watching This Made The Chippa.
Hey everybody, this is Chris Chipman, aka The Chippa, the creator of The Chippa Made This umbrella of podcasts and other random shows and stuff. You can go to my YouTube channel under Chris Chipman or at The Chippa, I think is how you get to that over there. The Chippa Made This podcasts are the Chipman Brothers Tangent, Creating Geeks, the Talkbuster podcast, and Shooting the Shit with Chippa. I also do Hopped Ones, which is a hot wing challenge, but with beer, similar to the show Hot Ones. It's an homage to Hot Ones, which if you join my Patreon, patreon.com/TheChippa, each new episode of that stays patron exclusive for a bit as well. But I call the podcasts The Chippa Made This. They're all shows that I make. This is all content that I make. But what made me? What made me who I am today? I'm 36 years old. I was born in 1984. And so I had a cool idea. So you have The Chippa Made This. The name of this show is This Made The Chippa. And our very first year in This Made The Chippa is the year I was born, 1984. Now, to give you a little bit of a background into how I'm going to do this show, I'm going to talk about notable events, things that happened that year. Maybe you're too young to have remembered. Maybe you're older than I and you lived through it. But just to give you a time and place for the years that I lived through. So you get an idea of, before Chippa was born, that didn't exist. That's kind of wild. And it also puts you in the mindset of the time and place that I'm talking about. After going through those notable events, I picked a few films that meant a lot to me that came out that year. Now, of course, in the earlier days, the 1984s and so on, I'm not going to be able to tell you I saw this movie when I was 1 year old or 1 month old or whatever, but I'm going to talk about where I was at in my life when I saw the movie for the first time, or a notable time I saw the movie in my life, and what it means to me. So hopefully you enjoy coming along on this journey. All of my other shows, I usually have guests. This is a solo outing for me, so hopefully you enjoy listening to me enough that you'll find this an interesting journey to take with me. So with that, this is the very first episode of This Made The Chippa. The year is 1984. Okay, 1984 was a leap year. So 3 days. I was born on February 26th, 1984. I was 3 days away from being a leap baby. I have an uncle, and I'll call him an uncle using air quotations, and you can't see that, because we joke, because he was actually born on February 29th on a leap year. So he just celebrated like his 14th birthday or something crazy like that, or whatever it is. It's probably more like the 7th or whatever, but it's really cool that I'm just realizing now after taking these notes that I was 3 days away from being a leap baby. So that's super, super interesting. We joke, me and most of the kids I know around my age that were born and grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts, which is a tiny suburb, not a tiny suburb, it's actually a big city, but it's smaller than Boston. It's a couple cities north of Boston. You got Boston and Everett and Revere, Chelsea and Lynn. It's got some good parts, got some bad parts, but I was born at Lynn Hospital, and anyone born, I think, after 1990 or 1991 can't say that, because after 1991, Lynn Hospital was a Stop and Shop. So we all joke that we were born in a Stop and Shop, and it's funny. So what else was going on in 1984? Ronald Reagan was president. Not much more to say about that, other than the current administration mentions Ronald Reagan a hell of a lot. It would be cool to get back into the brains of being a young parent at the time with a president like that. But, I'm sure more of these world events will bring you more into there. But Ronald Reagan was president the day I was born. Marvin Gaye was shot by his father on April 1st of 1984, shot and killed by his father. On April 23rd, the United States researchers announced that they discovered the AIDS virus. Big deal, a big part of the 80s and the early 90s, and recording this at the time of the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. Virus epidemics on the brain. On June 6th, Tetris was officially released in the Soviet Union on the Electronica 60. Tetris. On June 12th in the NBA Finals, the Boston Celtics, beat the Los Angeles Lakers in 7 games to capture their 15th NBA championship. On July 27th, Metallica releases their second studio album, Ride the Lightning. So Ride the Lightning didn't exist until after I was born. Pretty freaking cool. On September 10th, Jeopardy began its syndicated version with the first showing of present-day host Alex Trebek. And, Alex Trebek, strong cancer fighter, real sad times for him, but he's still out there and he's doing it. But all the strength in the world we can give to Alex Trebek. November 25th, Band-Aid, assembled by Bob Geldof, records the charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas Time at All? In London to raise money to combat the famine in Ethiopia. It is released on December 3rd. Crack cocaine, a smokable form of the drug, is first introduced into Los Angeles and soon spreads across the United States in what becomes known as the crack epidemic during the year of 1984. So with that, we get into the meat of my solo outing here. Where I talk about a few films. I've picked 7. God, 1984 was an amazing year for movies. But I picked 7, want to talk about when I saw them first or some notable times and places like I talked about. So, to let you know, my favorite film of all time, which you've heard me mention on other podcasts, is Jaws. I love Jaws. Jaws came out in 1976. I believe I was 4 years old when I saw Jaws. There's several other podcasts out there where you can hear me talk about Jaws, but just wanted to preempt because I'm going to say a lot of movies are damn near my favorite or tied my favorite with Jaws, but it's because it's just such a damn great movie. But getting into it, so a podcast that you'll probably get to hear soon after or maybe before you hear this episode for the first time, I recorded an episode with School of Movies. Alex and Sharon Shaw, who I absolutely adore and am honored that they've allowed me to come and be part of their amazing show over there from time to time. We did an episode on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, that is a widely not very liked Indiana Jones film. I have some parts of it that hold close to my heart. Watching it as an adult is a lot more difficult of a take. There's a lot of racism and it's kind of progresses in the opposite direction in the way it handles its female characters than the first Indiana Jones outing and even Last Crusade. But going back to when I was a child, Temple of Doom was my very first introduction to Indiana Jones. And so that painted my view of the character. Now, I believe this movie came out on May 23rd, 1984. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. I don't believe that. I know that. But I believe that I probably wasn't much older than 3 or 4 years old when I saw this movie for the first time. I would hope it was a TV edit or it was something, that my parents fast forwarded through the parts. But this movie absolutely friggin' terrified me. My father, and the way I'm going to be talking about a lot of these movies from my childhood, had 100, 200 VHS cassette recorded off HBO and other channels, library of movies. And each tape, on long play, for those of you that remember VHS cassettes, you could fit 6 hours on there. So that was about 3 movies. And this one was on over and over and over again. So it's interesting that I saw Temple of Doom first. It painted my view of Indy as more of that like old-fashioned, George Lucas, old serial character like he kind of wanted him to be. And it was more, violent and gross and vulgar and less adventurous and fun. We talk about on the School of Movies podcast how this movie kind of gets really dark for a while. But as a kid, I loved that. I loved the horror of it. And so, movie number 1, probably one of the first movies I can remember ever seeing at home, was a Steven Spielberg movie, and there's going to be a lot to tie in there. So childhood Chris loves Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Adult Chris accepts the things that are wrong with it and still kind of enjoys the hell out of it. And that's the first movie in 1984. And the first movie of the year that I was born, 1984. So the next is Ghostbusters. I told you what a whiz-bang year, right? I was born the year all of these iconic films came about. Ghostbusters, directed by Ivan Reitman, June 8th, 1984. What more can be said about Ghostbusters than what's already been said? I will preempt this by starting to get those of you that are going to click off and run away now that I'm OG Ghostbusters fan, right? This was my bread and butter when I was a kid. I had the Proton Pack. I had my own homemade Ghostbusters outfits. I had all the toys. I watched the cartoon, which is how I got into the Ghostbusters to start with. But this movie was on constant extended play in my life. And I still loved the 2016 all-female cast Ghostbusters, directed by, I'm going to say, is it Paul Feig? Yeah, because it's Kevin Feige, Marvel. Paul Feig is the 2016 Ghostbusters. But do I feel that it's as good as this? No effing way. It's a little bit too much of an SNL sketch, kind of has that Anchorman, Austin Powers feel to it. But when it works, it works. The cast is great, and it is Funny funny, and I love that about it. But we're talking about the original Ghostbusters. This movie is scary. This movie is hilarious, and this movie is iconic. It is one of the last of the practical effect horror action films that came out in the 80s. They started in the late 80s, moving over into more digital effects. It has those amazing cloud rolling in shots that were so iconic of the time. It's just one of the funniest horror comedies ever made, and the cast is great, and I can't wait for Jason Reitman's direct sequel to Ghostbusters 1 and 2, and I'm just so happy that this film existed. You look at any old video footage of me as a child, and it's me running around in the summertime in the hot weather in, my, like, fighter pilot jacket that I turned into like a Ghostbusters jacket, and heavy pants with the backpack and belts and all this stuff on in like 80-degree, 90-degree weather while camping, running around with my fake proton pack because I didn't have the toy yet. And it was either that or Superman, right? I didn't go anywhere. And so, it's really goddamn important to me. And that's Ghostbusters. Next is Gremlins, which very interestingly, now Gremlins, directed by Joe Dante. This movie, this is a first that I've noticed this, was released on June 8th, 1984. It was released the same day as Ghostbusters in theaters. Now, Gremlins, to me, listener, you can tell me if you feel the same way. It's a Christmas movie. How did this play on June 8th? This is a Christmas film. Also, even though the movie is pretty good as a kid's horror movie, I realized when I got older that my parents always fast-forwarded past the Santa Claus reveal sequence of the film, which is one super dark and also terrifying, and how the hell did this make it to the final cut? But goddamn, is Gremlins not awesome. The effects work on the characters are great. Gizmo is iconic to the nth degree. It solidified Joe Dante, from his early days working with Roger Corman, as just a master of horror and humor. He continued on his career with that forever after Gremlins. Even the lesser of his films are still great, in my opinion. Just as a kid with my brother, you didn't mention before, MovieBob Chipman. This was one of our favorites. The score, the den 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 den, and it's kind of under that umbrella of movies, that were all kind of influenced by the Steven Spielberg group. Even though Gremlins is very much a Joe Dante movie, it has that kind of the oddness of childhood interacting with these things. A lot of like untrustable authority figures and parents, and the kids are the only ones that can figure it out. And, it very much fits in with being like an Amblin movie from the time. And I just love the hell out of it. The next movie of 1984, which I'm going to admit, I saw a bunch when I was a little kid, but wasn't as into it until really my adulthood, when the television show based on it, Cobra Kai, came out, was The Karate Kid, directed by John G. Avildsen, the same guy who made Rocky. Surprise, surprise, they're very similar types of stories. This came out on June 22nd, 1984. What a summer to have been through films on. But, The Karate Kid, everyone knows The Karate Kid. Even when I was a kid and hadn't seen as much of it, The Karate Kid, The Karate Kid, The Karate Kid. We all wanted to be, karate guys. We all wanted to go to the dojo and get it. It was so embedded in culture from the early 80s to the early 90s, particularly in suburban white kids, to tell you the truth. But The Karate Kid hits those notes perfectly. But coming back to it as an adult and realizing what I had missed, it's just a really, really well done movie, a really well acted movie, and God, is Cobra Kai not the friggin' balls. And you guys should check it out. And go back and check out The Karate Kid. The sequels have diminishing returns, but there's some fun to be had in each of them. But The Karate Kid, 1984, another one of the things that made the Chippa. Just in my later life, it would seem. The Last Starfighter. how many people listening have ever seen The Last Starfighter? Now, I talked about the kind of moving away from practical effects into digital effects, computer graphics. This movie had a mix of all of it. This movie had some incredibly horrific body horror stuff, some pretty damn great costume work on the aliens and some of the characters, but also for early CGI, some pretty awesome spaceflight sequences that really, I won't say they hold up from being believable, but they work. They were very efficient and well done. So for those that haven't seen The Last Starfighter, can't have a more freaking badass movie for a kid of the 80s. Now, again, 2, 3, 4 years old is when I'm thinking I saw this for the first time. And the idea is that a down and out kid that doesn't really fit in with any group and kind of, wants more of himself, very similar to a lot of the Amblin films of the time, plays an arcade game at the trailer park where he lives all the time. And the arcade game is called Starfighter. And he gets the high score, and an alien guy shows up to let him know that this game is a recruitment tool for an intergalactic war that they're fighting, and by winning it, he is the person from Earth that is going to be able to come and help them win this war. It is awesome, hero's journey type stuff, dreams coming true, power fantasy, all of that stuff melded into one awesome film. Great sci-fi, great, horrific sequences. This one in Flight of the Navigator, which I don't remember if it came out the same year. If it didn't, sorry, I missed it on the show, but can only talk about so much. We're really a 1-2 punch of just weird, strange films from the 80s that worked, because we'll get into it. There's a lot of weird ones that didn't work. But this one, near and dear to my heart, The Last Starfighter, go and check it out. It was directed by Nick Castle, and it came out on July 13th, 1984. The next one, holy shit, Artax! For those of you that aren't crying already, you have no soul. I am, of course, talking about The Neverending Story. One of the first films of my childhood that I recall that taught me empathy. It taught me sadness. It taught me about loss. This movie is one hell of a therapy session for a young kid. It's kind of the dangerous version of the stuff the Amblin films were just kind of toying with. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen, the director of Das Boot, and a multitude of other things. I think he made Air Force One. He made The Perfect Storm guy with George Clooney up there in Gloucester Kid. But The Neverending Story, they just don't get more amazing of fantasy film than this. So for those of you that may have never seen The Neverending Story, a kid steals a book from a local book dealer or librarian or whatever. It's a new one, and it's got this creepy engraving and this aura and this infinity snake thing on the front of it. And the kid takes the book and goes and hangs out in a school during a I guess he just doesn't want to go home. He's upset. Turns out he may have lost his mother. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Disappears into this book called The Neverending Story, and the book is about the nothing, a thing that's destroying it because people basically aren't into fantasy anymore, or are depressed, or are growing up. You see all these things play in, and he has to go there and kind of go through his own journey. A lot of this movie reminds me a lot of The Last Jedi, actually. There's some scenes that are very akin to that. Won't get into that. But The Neverending Story is just, it's full of incredible special effects, incredible creature work. This Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal make a perfect trifecta of just distressing, strange, PTSD-inducing children's films, and it's one of my favorites. 1984, my last film I've chosen for this year, The Terminator, directed by James Cameron, came out on October 26th, 1984. Holy shit, The Terminator. So when I think The Terminator, I always think back to Terminator 2. Terminator 2 came out in 1992, I believe. I was 8 years old when that came out, and I was not prepared for Terminator 2. Terminator 2 shook my shit up. But for some reason, and maybe it was just that the original Terminator, you kind of have, it's very hot and cold, not hot and cold, black and white over who's good and who's bad and what's dangerous and what isn't. And so I had seen a lot of horror movies and things at the time period. So the Terminator being staged more like Halloween with a robot made it a little bit easier to take. Terminator 2 hits on some bigger themes, but man, the original Terminator, again, I was probably 5, 6, 7 years old. Probably shouldn't have watched this film, but I saw it, and hot damn, is it an awesome flick. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the first times we've seen Arnold Schwarzenegger as a culture. James Cameron, one of his very early films, it just, there's not a lot more that can be said, but it shaped me. These movies shaped me. And God, it's crazy that my first year of life is such a wild year to start with. But yeah, that's it. So, This Made The Chippa, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Ghostbusters, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, The Last Starfighter, The Neverending Story, and The Terminator. Just a piece of the many, many, many years of geekdom and movie watching and just awesomeness and odd things going on in society that made the Chippa. Thank you very, very much for listening, and I'll be back with 1985 soon. Talk to you soon. Bye.
This is Chris from Less Than Jake, and if you haven't already figured it out, you're watching This Made the Chippa.